A single gunshot echoed across the Wyoming Valley, slicing through the stillness of the night. Inside a small cabin, illuminated only by the flickering glow of an oil lamp, Holt Fletcher stood trembling. The revolver in his weathered hand still smoked, its barrel warm against his calloused palm. His face, lined with years of sun and sorrow, glistened with tears that carved paths through the dust on his cheeks. On the bed before him lay a motionless form, now covered with a threadbare blanket. The silence that followed the gunshot was heavier than any sound Holt had ever known. "Forgive me, Lord," he whispered, his voice cracking like dry leather. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath his feet as he took a step backward, the reality of what he'd done washing over him like ice water. The cabin walls seemed to close in, and the shadows in the corners grew deeper, darker. Outside, a gentle wind stirred the prairie grass, carrying the echo of the shot across the empty miles. Stars pierced the inky blackness of the sky, bearing witness to the act of mercy and despair that had unfolded beneath their cold, distant light. Holt's knees finally gave way. He sank onto the rough-hewn chair by the bedside, the revolver clattering to the floor. With shaking hands, he covered his face, shoulders heaving with silent sobs. 3 days earlier, life had been different. Not easier, but different. Simpler in its loneliness, predictable in its emptiness. 3 days earlier, the crimson sunset blazed across the Wyoming sky, painting the scattered clouds with fiery brushstrokes. Holt Fletcher rode across the open valley, his silhouette a dark smudge against the dying light. His horse, Ember, moved with steady determination, her brown coat tinged red in the fading sun. The white star-shaped mark on her forehead seemed to glow as they made their way home. At 55, Holt was a man carved from the land itself, weathered, hard, and enduring. His face, once handsome, now bore the lines of years spent under relentless sun and bitter winters. His eyes, the blue-gray of storm clouds, remained sharp beneath the brim of his worn hat. He sat tall in the saddle despite the aches that had settled into his bones like unwelcome tenants. Holt Fletcher was known throughout the territory as a man of few words but solid character. The kind of man who would ride 20 miles to return a stray calf, who paid his debts promptly, who never started trouble but wouldn't back down from it either. What people didn't know, what they couldn't see, was the hollowness he carried inside, the space carved out by loss and regret. As he crested the final ridge that overlooked his modest ranch, Holt paused, letting Ember rest. Below, his small cabin stood against the landscape, smoke curling lazily from the stone chimney. Beyond it stretched his land, not vast by Wyoming standards, but enough to sustain a small herd of cattle and the lone man who tended them. "Home again, girl," he murmured to Ember, who flicked her ears in response. The word felt hollow in his mouth. Home. Once it had been filled with laughter, with Eleanor's gentle voice, with William's running footsteps. Now it was just wood and stone, a place to shelter from the elements but little else. Ember started down the slope without prompting, knowing the way. As they approached the cabin, Holt's hand moved to his vest pocket, fingers touching the small metal object he carried always. A silver pocket watch, never presented to its intended owner, engraved with the name William Fletcher. Inside his cabin, Holt moved with the efficiency of long routine. He cared for Ember first, unsaddling, brushing, feeding, before tending to his own needs. The horse was more than a tool or companion. She was a link to his past, having carried both Eleanor and William on her back in happier days. As darkness settled fully over the land, Holt sat at his rough-hewn table with a plate of simple food and a cup of strong coffee. The silence pressed around him like a physical presence. No creaking floorboards beneath another's footsteps. No voice asking about his day. Just the occasional pop from the fireplace and the distant cry of a coyote. After eating, he took a wooden box from the shelf near his bed. Inside, wrapped in a handkerchief, lay a locket containing a small daguerreotype of Eleanor, her eyes kind even in the formal pose of the photograph. Beside it rested a folded piece of paper, the last letter from William, received over a year ago. Just 5 words scratched in hasty handwriting. "I'm still alive. Don't look." The brevity cut deeper than any lengthy explanation could have. After 3 years of absence, just 5 words. No mention of forgiveness. No hint of return. Just the cold assurance that the boy still drew breath, and the colder command to leave him be. Holt's thoughts drifted back to the argument that had driven his son away. William had been 19, full of dreams and restlessness. He'd wanted to sell part of their land to invest in a gold mining venture. Holt had refused. "This land is all we have," he'd insisted, "all we can count on." William's face had darkened, his mother's temper flaring in his eyes. "Mother died because of this place, and I'll die here too if I stay." The words had struck like physical blows, breaking something in Holt that had never fully mended. He'd responded with equal hurt, his hands striking out before he could stop it. The slap had echoed in the small cabin, followed by words even more damaging. "Then get out if you think you're so damn smart." By morning, William was gone, taking only his horse, his gun, and the handkerchief that had belonged to his mother. He'd left behind the half-finished carving he'd been working on and the pocket watch Holt had bought for his 20th birthday, a gift never given. 3 years had passed, 3 years of checking the horizon, of listening for hoofbeats that never came, of wondering if his son was warm, fed, safe. 3 years of rehearsing apologies that might never be spoken. Holt could never look at the southeast corner of the cabin without thinking of Eleanor. It was where they'd placed her bed when the consumption had progressed too far, leaving her unable to walk. That brutal winter had drained her last strength, each cough like a knife to Holt's heart. The doctors from town could do little. Take her to Denver, they'd advised, where larger hospitals and specialists might help. But such a journey in those harsh conditions would likely kill her before they made it halfway. And the cost? Holt had already sold part of his herd just to pay the local physician. "Stay with me," Eleanor had insisted, her eyes clouded by illness but still determined. "I want to see our stars." So they had stayed, and Holt had done everything possible. Warm blankets, herbal remedies, even seeking advice from a Shoshone healer. But the disease ravaged her body until, on a February night, as the first snowflakes of a spring storm began to fall, Eleanor Fletcher breathed her last in her husband's arms. William, only 16 then, hadn't spoken for days after the funeral. And when he finally did, it was to blame this land, the isolation, the harsh winters, the lack of proper medical care. Accusations Holt couldn't refute, for he'd tortured himself with the same thoughts. Holt carefully returned the items to the box and placed it back on the shelf. He then took his rifle and stepped onto the porch. The night air carried the scent of sage and pine. Above, the vast Wyoming sky was ablaze with stars, more than any city dweller would ever see in a lifetime. Ember stood in her pen nearby, her shape a darker shadow against the night. She raised her head as Holt appeared, nickering softly in recognition. "Just checking, girl," he said, his voice rough from disuse. It was his nightly ritual, scanning the darkness for any sign of trouble, listening for sounds that didn't belong. The wilderness demanded vigilance, and loneliness had only sharpened his senses. As he turned to go back inside, a distant howl rose from somewhere to the north. A wolf, solitary and haunting. Holt paused, listening until the sound faded. Something about the lonely call resonated within him, touching a part of his soul that understood isolation all too well. "Good hunting," he murmured to the unseen creature, then stepped back inside, bolting the door against the night. Tomorrow would bring more of the same: cattle to check, fences to mend, an empty house to return to. But for now, he would sleep, and perhaps in dreams find the peace that eluded him in waking hours. As he settled onto his bed, Holt's last thought before sleep claimed him was of William. Where was his son tonight? Was he looking at these same stars? Did he ever think of home? The questions had no answers, only the hollow ache of absence that had become Holt's constant companion. Outside, Ember shifted in her pen, suddenly alert. Her ears pricked forward as she stared into the darkness beyond the cabin. Something or someone was coming. The next morning dawned clear, the air crisp with early autumn chill. Holt woke before sunrise, as he had for most of his life. Years of ranching had ingrained the habit so deeply that even on days when his bones ached and his spirit was weary, his eyes would open with the first gray light. He moved through his morning routine mechanically, stoking the fire, brewing coffee, preparing a simple breakfast. His thoughts kept drifting to the strange dream that had haunted his night. William standing at the edge of a cliff, reaching back toward him, mouth open in a silent call for help. In the dream, Holt had tried to run to him, but his legs wouldn't move, as if they'd taken root in the rocky soil. As he stepped outside with his steaming cup, The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, pushing back the blanket of stars. Ember greeted him with a soft whicker, pawing at the ground impatiently. "Morning to you too," Holt said, his voice still rough with sleep. He noticed immediately that something was different. Ember seemed agitated, her usual morning calmness replaced by an alertness that put Holt on edge. He scanned the surroundings, one hand instinctively moving toward the knife at his belt. The land appeared peaceful enough, rolling hills stretching to the distant mountains, the small creek glimmering in the early light, a few cattle visible as dark shapes against the pale grass. But Holt had lived in this wild country long enough to trust his horse's instincts over his own eyes. "What is it, girl?" he murmured, moving closer to Ember and running a calming hand down her neck. A distant rumble of thunder answered him, though the sky remained mostly clear. "Storm coming, maybe." That would explain Ember's restlessness. Animals always sensed weather changes before humans could. After tending to Ember and his small herd, Holt decided to ride out to check the north pasture. Several head of cattle had been missing for 2 days, likely having found a weak spot in the fence line. With the threat of a storm, he needed to locate them quickly. As he rode out, the strange sense of foreboding stayed with him. Something about the quality of the light, the unusual stillness in the air. Even the birds seemed quieter than normal. Just weather, he told himself aloud, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. By midday, dark clouds had gathered on the western horizon, their edges tinged with an ominous green-gray. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and ozone. Holt had found the missing cattle, 3 heifers and a young bull, grazing contentedly by the creek that marked the boundary of his property. He was herding them back toward home when Ember suddenly stopped, her ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. This time Holt heard it too, a sound almost lost beneath the rising wind. A human voice, weak and distant, coming from somewhere near the creek bend. Holt hesitated, his hand moving to the rifle in its scabbard. In this territory, caution kept men alive. Rustlers, drifters, and desperate men were common enough to warrant wariness. But the voice came again, clearly a cry of distress rather than a call of greeting. Someone was hurt. "Stay," he commanded the cattle, knowing they'd likely scatter without him, but having little choice. He turned Ember toward the creek, following the sound. Near a cluster of willows at the water's edge, Holt spotted movement. Dismounting swiftly, he approached with his rifle ready, years of frontier living having taught him that even injured men could be dangerous. What he found, half submerged in the shallow water, was a young man barely conscious. His clothes were torn and bloodied, his face pale beneath a growth of beard. A dark stain spread across his left side, the unmistakable evidence of a gunshot wound. Holt knelt beside him, setting his rifle within reach. "Easy now," he said, pressing his hand against the wound to slow the bleeding. "Can you tell me your name, son?" The young man's eyes flickered open, glazed with pain and confusion. His lips, cracked and dry, moved with effort. "Jack," he whispered, voice barely audible above the wind. Holt's breath caught in his throat. The name meant nothing, this wasn't his William, and yet something about the young man's features tugged at his memory. Through the beard and the grime and the pain-twisted expression, there was a familiarity that made Holt's heart race. "Jack what?" Holt asked, trying to keep his voice steady as he worked to assess the wound. The young man's eyes slid closed again, his energy spent. Holt moved quickly, tearing strips from his own shirt to create a makeshift bandage. As he worked, his gaze caught on something protruding from the wounded man's jacket pocket, the edge of a cloth, embroidered with delicate stitches. With trembling fingers, Holt carefully pulled it free. A handkerchief, once white, now stained with dirt and blood. In the corner, faded but unmistakable, were the initials E.F. embroidered in blue thread. Eleanor Fletcher. The world seemed to tilt beneath Holt's knees. He looked again at the young man's face, really looked, past the beard and the years and the changes. The shape of the brow, the arch of the eyebrows, the small scar at the temple from a childhood fall. This was no stranger named Jack. This was William, his son, his boy, home at last and dying before his eyes. For several heartbeats, Holt remained frozen, the revelation stealing his breath as surely as a physical blow. William, his William, lay before him, gravely wounded and unrecognizable in his own father's eyes. The bitter irony wasn't lost on Holt. After 3 years of scanning every horizon, his son had returned, and he hadn't even known him. Thunder cracked overhead, breaking the spell. Dark clouds now blotted out the sun, casting the creek bank in premature twilight. The first heavy raindrops began to fall, striking the water's surface like bullets. "William," Holt whispered, his voice barely audible above the rising wind. His son gave no response, having slipped back into unconsciousness. Blood continued to seep through the makeshift bandage, washing away with the rain that now fell in earnest. Holt knew with grim certainty that if he didn't get William to shelter soon, the boy would bleed out here by the creek, with the rain washing away any trace that he'd ever come home. With a strength born of desperation, Holt gathered his son's limp form into his arms. William had always been lean, but now he felt alarmingly light, as though the years away had hollowed him out. Holt staggered slightly under the burden, his aging knees protesting, but determination drove him forward toward Ember, who stood patiently in the increasing downpour. "Need your help now, girl," Holt murmured as he approached. Getting William onto the horse was a struggle that left Holt gasping for breath. He managed to position his son face down across the saddle, securing him as best he could before mounting behind him. Holt's arm wrapped protectively around William's waist, holding him steady while his other hand gripped the reins. "Home, Ember," he commanded, his voice nearly lost in a crack of thunder. "Fast as you can." The loyal mare needed no further urging. She seemed to sense the urgency, picking her way carefully but quickly along the creek bank before breaking into a steady lope across the open pasture toward the distant cabin. Rain lashed at them mercilessly, turning the ground treacherous beneath Ember's hooves. Each jolt sent a fresh surge of blood from William's wound, darkening Holt's already soaked sleeve. In the distance, Holt could make out dark figures on horseback silhouetted against the stormy sky, 3 or 4 riders moving along the ridgeline, seemingly searching for something, or someone. Instinctively, Holt guided Ember into a shallow ravine, using it for cover. Those riders could be innocent travelers seeking shelter from the storm, but the cold weight settling in Holt's stomach told him otherwise. William had mentioned rustlers before losing consciousness. If those men had shot his son and were tracking him to finish the job, they'd find more than they bargained for at the Fletcher Ranch. The journey home seemed interminable, each minute stretching into what felt like hours. William remained unconscious, his body growing colder despite the relative warmth of the summer rain. Several times Holt feared his son had died in his arms, and only the faint, erratic rise and fall of William's chest assured him that life remained. "Hold on, boy," Holt found himself repeating like a prayer with each stride of the horse. "Just hold on." By the time they reached the cabin, the storm was in full fury, sheets of rain reducing visibility to mere yards. Lightning split the sky with blinding frequency, followed almost immediately by deafening thunder. Ember skidded to a stop before the cabin porch, sides heaving with exertion. Somehow, Holt managed to get William down from the horse and into his arms again. He kicked open the cabin door and staggered inside, laying his son on the bed with more gentleness than his trembling arms seemed capable of. Water pooled beneath them both, soaking the rough woolen blanket. "Gotta get you warm and dry," Holt muttered, more to hear his own voice than anything else. The silence from William frightened him more than any cry of pain would him. Working quickly, Holt built up the fire until it roared in the stone fireplace. He stripped away William's sodden, bloodied clothes, his heart constricting at the sight of his son's body, too thin, and covered with scars that hadn't been there 3 years ago. The gunshot wound in his side was ugly, the flesh around it angry and inflamed. The bullet remained lodged inside. Holt could see where it had entered but found no exit wound. "What have you gotten yourself into, William?" he whispered, reaching for the whiskey bottle he kept for medicinal purposes. Holt cleaned the wound as best he could, using techniques he'd learned during his brief stint with the cavalry decades ago. The bullet would need to come out, but first he had to stop the bleeding and warm his son before shock claimed him entirely. As he worked, Holt found himself talking, the words spilling out after years of silence. "You picked one hell of a way to come home, boy," he said, wrapping clean bandages around William's torso. "Could have just knocked on the door like civilized folk. But no, you had to come half-drowned and shot up." His voice cracked slightly. "Always did have to make an entrance." Outside, the storm raged on, rain hammering against the roof with such force that Holt wondered if it might cave in. Ember would be miserable in her pen, But there was no helping that now. William needed him more. After bandaging the wound, Holt covered his son with every blanket he possessed, then set a pot of water to boil on the stove. He needed to make a poultice for the wound and brew willow bark tea to help with the fever that was surely coming. As he worked, movement from the bed caught his eye. William's eyelids fluttered, then opened. For a moment, his gaze wandered unfocused around the cabin until it settled on Holt. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by disbelief. "Pa!" The word was barely a whisper, raspy and uncertain. Holt abandoned his task instantly, moving to kneel beside the bed. "I'm here, son," he said, his voice gentler than it had been in years. William's eyes, so like Eleanor's, searched his father's face as if looking for confirmation that this wasn't some fever dream. "How did you—" "Found you by the creek," Holt answered. "You've been shot. Bad. Need to get that bullet out soon." William's hand moved weakly to his side, feeling the bandage. "Didn't think I'd make it this far," he admitted. A coughing fit overtook him, and Holt supported his shoulders until it passed, leaving William even paler than before. "Why?" Holt began, then stopped himself. There would be time for questions later. "Rest now. We'll talk when you're stronger." But William's hand shot out with surprising strength, gripping Holt's wrist. "No," he gasped. "They might be coming. Need to tell you." "Who's coming, William? The men who shot you?" William nodded weakly. "Cordell's gang. I found something they want." His eyes began to drift closed again, the brief surge of energy fading. "William!" Holt squeezed his son's shoulder. "Stay with me, boy. What did you find?" William's eyes opened again with visible effort. "Gold," he whispered. "Found a vein. Just like I said I would. They want the map." His hand moved to his chest, where Holt now noticed a small leather pouch hanging from a cord around his neck. "Don't let them have it, Pa." Before Holt could respond, William slipped back into unconsciousness, his breathing shallow and irregular. Holt sat back on his heels, mind racing. Gold. After all this time, William had actually found gold, the very thing they had argued about 3 years ago. The dream Holt had dismissed as foolishness had apparently come true. The irony was almost too much to bear. A particularly violent thunderclap shook the cabin, bringing Holt back to the immediate crisis. He had to remove that bullet soon, or infection would set in if it hadn't already. He gathered his supplies, the sharpest knife he owned, boiled clean, forceps that he used for removing splinters, more whiskey, clean rags, and a stick for William to bite down on when the pain came. As he prepared, Holt's mind kept returning to William's warning. Cordell's gang. The name was vaguely familiar. Mason Cordell was known throughout the territory as a ruthless outlaw who specialized in claim jumping and extortion rather than simple robbery. If William had crossed him, there would be hell to pay. Holt glanced toward the window, but the storm's fury rendered it impossible to see if anyone approached. If Cordell and his men were searching for William, the storm might buy them some time. No one in their right mind would be traveling in such weather. With everything prepared, Holt took a deep breath and a long swallow of whiskey for steady hands. He'd removed bullets before, twice from fellow ranchers, once from himself, but never from his own flesh and blood. "Forgive me for this, son," he murmured, pouring whiskey liberally over the wound. The pain must have penetrated even William's unconscious state, for his body arched and a low moan escaped his lips. Holt worked quickly after that, cutting into the inflamed flesh to widen the entry wound. Blood welled up immediately, but less than he'd feared. He probed carefully with the forceps, searching for the lead slug buried somewhere in his son's side. William's eyes flew open at the intrusion, a hoarse scream tearing from his throat. His body bucked against Holt's restraining arm. "Easy, son," Holt grunted, pressing down harder to keep William still. "Almost got it." Through either mercy or exhaustion, William passed out again just as Holt located the bullet. With a grim smile of triumph, he extracted the misshapen piece of lead and dropped it into a tin cup with a small clink that was nearly lost beneath the storm's cacophony. "There you go, boy," Holt said softly, pressing a clean cloth against the now freely bleeding wound. "Worst part's over." He worked methodically after that, cleaning, stitching, and bandaging. When he finally sat back, hands cramped and back aching, the storm outside had begun to subside. The thunder now rumbled more distantly, and the rain had softened to a steady patter. Holt washed the blood from his hands in a basin, then sank into the chair beside the bed, suddenly exhausted. William's breathing seemed a little steadier now, though a fever had begun to build, turning his skin hot to the touch. The coming hours would tell whether he'd live or die, and there was little more Holt could do now except wait and pray, something he hadn't done much of since Eleanor's passing. As the adrenaline of the crisis began to ebb, the reality of the situation settled over him like a heavy blanket. His son had returned, not with forgiveness or reconciliation, but driven by desperation and mortal injury. And somewhere out there, dangerous men were hunting him, men who wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone who stood in their way. Holt's gaze fell on his rifle, propped against the wall near the door. He'd need to clean it, make sure it was ready, and check his ammunition supply. If Credell's gang came, he'd be ready. For now, though, he simply watched the rise and fall of William's chest, each breath a small victory against death's hovering presence. Outside, the last rumbles of thunder faded into silence, leaving only the gentle percussion of raindrops on the roof. In that moment of fragile peace, Holt did something he hadn't done in years. He bowed his head and prayed. "Eleanor," he whispered, "if you're listening, help me save our boy." As if in answer, William stirred slightly, his cracked lips forming a word Holt couldn't quite make out. Leaning closer, he heard it the second time, a name spoken with such longing that it made Holt's throat tighten. "Ma." Holt reached out and took his son's hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and harder living. "She's not here, son," he said softly, "but I am, and I'm not going anywhere." As night settled fully over the land, the storm passed, leaving behind a sky washed clean. Stars emerged one by one, their light filtering through the cabin's single window to cast a silver glow over the sleeping form on the bed and the watchful figure beside it. Father and son, together again after 3 long years. Whether in reconciliation or tragedy remained to be seen. But for now they were home, as the Wyoming stars kept their silent vigil overhead. Dawn broke with the particular clarity that follows a violent storm. The air washed clean and the light sharp enough to cut. Holt hadn't slept. He'd spent the night alternating between cooling William's fever with damp cloths and watching the window for any sign of approaching danger. His bones ached from sitting in the hard chair, but he refused to leave his son's side. William had passed the night restlessly, caught in the grip of fever dreams that manifested in mumbled words and occasional thrashing that threatened to tear his stitches. Holt had caught fragments of his son's delirious ramblings, pleas, apologies, warnings, most directed to people Holt didn't know. But occasionally William would call for him or for Eleanor, the raw need in his voice reopening wounds Holt thought had long since scarred over. Now, as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the cabin window, William seemed to have settled into a deeper, more peaceful sleep. His breathing, while still labored, had steadied, and the raging heat of his skin had diminished slightly. Small victories, but Holt would take them. With cautious movements, Holt checked the bandages. The wound showed no fresh bleeding, though the area remained angry and inflamed. Infection was the enemy now. Holt had seen strong men felled by it even after surviving the initial trauma. He replaced the poultice with a fresh one, using herbs he'd learned about from an old Shoshone woman who'd once traded with them. Yarrow to fight infection, comfrey to speed healing. As he worked, Holt studied his son's face, comparing it to the boy who had stormed out 3 years ago. The changes were profound. William's features had hardened, the last traces of youth burned away by whatever trials he'd endured. A scar Holt didn't recognize ran along his jawline. His hands, even in repose, seemed permanently tensed, as if ready to reach for a weapon. This was not the impulsive boy who had left, but a man shaped by harsh experience. "What happened to you out there, son?" Holt murmured, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. After ensuring William was as comfortable as possible, Holt finally stepped outside to check on Ember and the rest of his small ranch. The morning air felt good on his face, cool and sweet with the scent of wet sage. Puddles dotted the yard, reflecting the clear, blue sky overhead. In the distance, the mountains stood crisp and defined, their peaks gleaming with fresh snow from the storm. Ember nickered in greeting from her pen, apparently none the worse for weathering the storm outdoors. Holt felt a pang of guilt for neglecting her the previous night, but she seemed to harbor no grudge as he approached with a grain and fresh water. Good girl, he said, stroking her damp neck. You saved him, you know? As he tended to the horse, Holt kept a vigilant eye on the surrounding landscape. The storm had left the ground soft. Anyone approaching on horseback would leave tracks that would be clearly visible. So far, the land appeared undisturbed beyond the usual evidence of wildlife. Deer tracks near the water trough, the distinctive prints of a coyote that had passed through during the night. Satisfied that they were alone for the moment, Holt quickly checked his small herd, counting heads and finding all present. The cattle had clustered in the lee of a rocky outcropping during the storm and now grazed contentedly on the rain-freshened grass. Returning to the cabin, Holt paused at the threshold, a strange reluctance coming over him. Inside lay his son, returned from the dead in many ways. But was it a homecoming or merely a temporary crossing of paths? Would William, once recovered, simply disappear again? The thought sent a coldness through Holt's chest that had nothing to do with the morning air. He pushed the feeling aside and entered, finding William exactly as he had left him. Taking advantage of his son's continued unconsciousness, Holt finally examined the leather pouch William had clutched so protectively. Inside, he found several small nuggets of gold, not the fine dust of placer mining, but solid pieces that suggested a substantial vein, and a folded piece of oilskin containing a crude map. The map showed landmarks Holt recognized as being in the Wind River Range, perhaps 3 days' ride from the ranch. So William had been telling the truth. He'd found gold, just as he'd boasted he would 3 years ago. The realization brought a mixture of pride and shame to Holt's heart. Pride in his son's accomplishment, shame in his own dismissal of the boy's dreams. A soft groan from the bed drew Holt's attention. William's eyes were open, clearer now though still glazed with pain. He looked around in momentary confusion before his gaze settled on Holt. "Water," he croaked, his voice barely audible. Holt quickly fetched a cup, supporting William's head as he drank in small, careful sips. "Easy now," Holt cautioned. "Too much at once will make you sick." William nodded weakly, leaning back against the pillow. For a long moment, father and son regarded each other in silence, 3 years of separation and hurt stretching between them like a canyon. "How bad?" William finally asked, gesturing toward his bandaged side. "Bad enough," Holt replied honestly. "Bullets out, but you've lost a lot of blood. Fever's still running. You'll need to stay put for a while." A flicker of alarm crossed William's face. "I can't stay long. Cordell isn't coming through that door without going through me first," Holt interrupted, his voice hardening. "You're safe here, William." William studied his father's face, seeming to weigh something in his mind. "You don't understand, Pa. Mason Cordell isn't some two-bit rustler. He's got a dozen men riding with him, all killers, and he wants that map bad enough to burn this whole valley to the ground." "Let him try," Holt said simply. The words contained no bravado, just the quiet certainty of a man who had spent his life defending what was his. "Now you want to tell me what you've gotten yourself into? Start with why you're calling yourself Jack to your own father." William's eyes dropped, unable to meet Holt's steady gaze. "It wasn't meant for you. I've been using that name for a while now. Safer that way." "Safer from whom?" "Everyone." William coughed, wincing at the pain it caused in his injured side. "When I left here, I was angry, stupid, fell in with some odd men heading to the goldfields in Dakota Territory. They weren't prospectors, though. They were thieves, claim jumpers." Holt's expression remained impassive, though inwardly he felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. "Cordell's gang." William nodded. "I didn't know at first. By the time I figured it out, I was in too deep. They had a hold on me." His voice faltered. "I did things, Pa. Things I'm not proud of." "We all have," Holt said quietly. "Keep going." William took another small sip of water before continuing. "About a year ago, we were up in the Wind Rivers. I was scouting ahead, looking for isolated claims to hit. Instead, I found something better. Virgin territory with a gold vein so rich, you could see it glinting in the rock face." His eyes took on a distant gleam, remembering. "I knew what would happen if Cordell got his hands on it. He'd kill the rightful claimants, same as always. But this was my chance to get out clean. So I made a detailed map, then covered the entrance with rockfall before reporting back that the area was barren." "And kept the real map for yourself," Holt finished. William nodded. "Planned to wait until the gang moved on, then stake the claim legally. But Cordell's suspicious by nature. He sent men to double-check my report. They found traces I'd missed. Not enough to locate the vein, but enough to know I'd lied. His hand moved instinctively to the pouch around his neck. I ran that night, been running ever since. 3 days ago, they caught up to me near South Pass. I took a bullet, but managed to lose them in a ravine. Knew I couldn't make it to town in my condition, so I headed here instead. Holt absorbed the story in silence, trying to reconcile this hardened, desperate man with the boy who had stormed out of his life 3 years before. Whatever innocence William had possessed then had been burned away, replaced by a wary calculation that didn't sit well on features so similar to Eleanor's. "Does Cordell know who you really are?" Holt finally asked. "Does he know about this place?" "No," William replied. "I never used my real name with the gang, never talked about my past." A shadow crossed his face. "But he's persistent, Pa, and he has connections everywhere. If he wants to find me badly enough, he will." Holt nodded, accepting this as simple truth rather than fearful exaggeration. He'd lived in Wyoming territory long enough to know how small the world could be, how word traveled along invisible networks of saloons and trading posts and cattle drives. "Well, you need healing before you can run again," he said pragmatically, "and I need to know exactly what we're up against." He pulled his chair closer to the bed. "Tell me about Cordell. Everything you know." For the next hour, William described Mason Cordell and his operations in detail. The man's ruthlessness, his intelligence, his network of informants, his particular talent for finding those who crossed him. Cordell had started as a legitimate businessman, investing in mining operations around Deadwood. When several ventures failed, he turned to intimidation and outright theft, using the knowledge he'd gained legitimately to target vulnerable claims. "He's got a son about my age," William added. "Wait, not as vicious as his father, but just as dangerous in his own way. He's the one who shot me." "Tell me more about this Adam," Holt said, sensing there was more to the story. William looked toward the window, his expression distant. "We were on watch together one night in the mountains. Adam spoke about his father, not with pride, but with fear. Cordell never forgave weakness, and Adam grew up in that shadow." "You're defending him?" Holt asked, surprised. William shook his head. "No, just Adam could have chosen differently, but it's easier to follow the path laid out for you, especially when the one laying it out is someone you both fear and desperately want to please." William turned back to his father, a moment of understanding passing between them. "I guess we both know something about that." Holt nodded, recognizing that William wasn't just talking about Adam. "Cordell's not much of a father, then." "No," William admitted, "but he's the only one Adam's got." Holt listened intently, asking occasional questions, but mostly letting William talk. By the end, his son's voice had weakened to near whisper, exhaustion evident in the dark circles beneath his eyes. "Get some rest now," Holt said, rising from the chair. "I'll keep watch." William caught his wrist, his grip surprisingly strong despite his weakened state. "Pa, I'm sorry for bringing this trouble to your door." Holt looked down at his son's hand, then covered it with his own. "This door has always been open to you, William. Trouble or no." William's eyes, so like his mother's, searched Holt's face. "Even after everything I said? The way I left?" "Even then," Holt confirmed, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "You're my son." Something broke in William's expression then, a hardness giving way to a vulnerability he'd likely kept buried for years. "I found the gold, Pa," he whispered. "Just like I said I would. Wanted to prove you wrong. Wanted to make you proud too, somehow." Holt felt his throat tighten. "I was always proud, son. Just too damn stubborn to say it." William's eyes drifted closed, the conversation having drained his limited strength. Within moments, his breathing deepened into sleep, though the occasional twitch of his features suggested his dreams were far from peaceful. Holt remained by the bedside, watching his son's face in repose. So much had been left unsaid between them, so many hurts unaddressed. But there had been a beginning here, a small bridge built across the chasm of their separation. Whether they would have time to strengthen that bridge remained to be seen. Outside, a crow's harsh call broke the morning stillness. Holt moved to the window, scanning the horizon out of habit. The land appeared peaceful, but he knew better than to trust appearances. If William's assessment of Mason Cordell was accurate, trouble was coming. It was only a matter of when. Holt checked his rifle, ensuring it was cleaned and loaded, then placed it near the door where he could reach it quickly. He added wood to the fire and put coffee on to boil. Then he sat in the chair by the window, where he could watch both his son and the approaches to the cabin. The waiting had begun. As the morning stretched toward noon, Holt found his thoughts turning to Eleanor. What would she make of this situation? Of the man their son had become? Eleanor had always seen the best in William, had encouraged his dreams even when Holt counseled caution. Perhaps if she had lived, their son would never have left, never fallen in with men like Cordell. You'd know what to say to him now, Holt murmured, as if she might hear him across the divide of years and death. You always did. Only the soft crackling of the fire answered him, but somehow in the quiet of the cabin, with his son's steady breathing as counterpoint, Holt felt less alone than he had in years. The day crept forward with the slow deliberation of a wounded animal. By mid-afternoon, Holt had settled into the vigilant rhythm of caring for William while maintaining his watch on the surrounding landscape. He'd moved the chair to position himself between the bed and the door, his rifle propped against the wall within easy reach. The small cabin had become a fortress of sorts, protecting its wounded occupant while Holt stood sentinel. William drifted in and out of consciousness, moments of lucidity interspersed with feverish rambling. During one such period of clarity, he managed to eat a few spoonfuls of broth that Holt had prepared, each swallow clearly an effort. The fever hadn't broken, but neither had it worsened, another small victory in the ongoing battle. Need to check on Ember, Holt finally said, after ensuring William was resting comfortably. Won't be long. William nodded weakly, his eyes already closing again. Pa, he murmured as Holt reached the door. If you see dust on the horizon. I know, Holt replied grimly. I'll be quick. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard. The air had the peculiar stillness that often follows a storm, as if the land itself were recovering. Holt moved cautiously, senses alert for anything out of place. He tended to Ember with efficiency, checking her hooves for stone bruises after their hard ride the day before. Good girl, he murmured, running a hand down her sleek neck. Might need you again soon. As he worked, a movement at the edge of his vision caused him to tense. Turning slowly, hand drifting toward the knife at his belt, he relaxed slightly when he recognized the figure approaching on horseback. Abel Whitaker, his nearest neighbor, rode toward him on his old paint gelding, leading a second horse loaded with supplies. Abel was a tall man despite his 70 years, his snow-white hair contrasting sharply with his sun-darkened skin. A former preacher who had lost his faith, or transformed it, as he preferred to say, during the war, he now lived a solitary life in a small cabin about 5 miles east of Holt's property. They weren't friends exactly, but they had an understanding built on mutual respect and the occasional exchange of labor or goods. Fletcher, Abel called in greeting as he drew closer. Thought I'd check on you after that storm. Worst I've seen in years. Holt nodded, not moving to meet him. Abel was harmless, but William's warnings about Cordell's connections had left him wary of any visitor. Made it through fine. Appreciate the thought. Abel reined in a respectful distance away, his shrewd eyes taking in Holt's guarded stance and the blood stains on his shirt that he hadn't had time to change. Seems like maybe fine isn't the whole story, he observed quietly. Holt hesitated. Abel was one of the few people who knew about William's departure 3 years ago, having provided a sympathetic ear during those first dark months of absence. If trouble was coming, an ally might be valuable. And Abel, for all his age, was known to be deadly accurate with the old Sharps rifle he carried. William's back, Holt finally said, watching Abel's face carefully for his reaction. Shot up pretty bad. Rustlers after him, or so he says. Abel's eyebrows rose, but he showed no real surprise. The prodigal returns, he murmured. How bad is he hurt? Bad enough. Took a bullet in the side. Fever's been running all night. Abel dismounted stiffly, tying both horses to the rail. Got some medicines in my pack. Might help. He reached into one of his saddlebags and extracted a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Willow bark for the fever, yarrow tincture for infection. Holt accepted the bundle with a nod of thanks. Obliged. These rustlers, Abel asked as they walked toward the cabin, they likely to come looking for him? Count on it, Holt replied grimly. Leader's name is Mason Cordell. Know him? Abel's step faltered momentarily. Heard stories. Nothing good. He gave Holt a sidelong glance. You're planning to stand against him? Alone? If it comes to that. They reached the cabin door, and Holt paused, one hand on the latch. William doesn't know I'm telling you this. He's different from when he left. Harder, carrying things. Aren't we all? Abel said softly. Inside, they found William awake and alert, his hand clutching the blanket in a way that made Holt suspect he'd been reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Recognition flickered in his eyes as they settled on Abel. Reverend Whitaker, he said, his voice stronger than it had been earlier. Long time. Not a reverend anymore, son, as you well know, Abel replied with a small smile. Good to see you, though I wish the circumstances were better. While Abel examined William's wound with gentle, practiced hands, Holt busied himself preparing coffee. The scene struck him with an odd sense of normality, as if the years of separation had been erased and they were simply neighbors helping each other through hardship, as had always been the way in this unforgiving country. Wound's clean, Abel pronounced after redressing it with some of his yarrow tincture. No sign of mortification. Fever's the body's way of fighting, but we'll try to bring it down some. He prepared a bitter-smelling tea from the willow bark, which William drank without complaint despite its obviously unpleasant taste. As Abel worked, he spoke in the easy, measured tones that had once made him an effective preacher. He talked of small things, how his apple trees were bearing well this year, how a family of hawks had nested near his cabin, how the creek that divided their properties had changed course slightly after last spring's floods. Normal conversation, a reminder of the everyday world that continued despite personal dramas. William responded little, but Holt noticed how his son's tense posture gradually relaxed under Abel's calming presence. It occurred to him that this might be the first friendly face, besides his own, that William had seen in a very long time. After checking that William was comfortable, Abel motioned for Holt to join him outside. They stood on the porch, gazing out at the lengthening shadows while speaking in low tones. He's in rough shape, Holt, and I don't just mean the bullet wound, Abel said, his weathered face grave. That boy's seen things, done things that have marked him. I know, Holt replied. He admitted as much. Fell in with Cordell's gang, then double-crossed them over a gold claim. Abel whistled softly. That's playing with fire. Wouldn't be William if he didn't. Despite the gravity of the situation, Holt felt a flicker of his old pride in his son's boldness, however misguided it might have been. You need to be prepared, Abel said after a moment, not just for Cordell's men coming, but for the possibility that William might not be telling you everything. Men change out there, especially running with that sort of crowd. The boy you knew might not be the man who came back. The words stung, but Holt recognized their truth. He's still my son. Yes, Abel agreed quietly. He is. And you'll do what needs doing, as you always have. He placed a hand on Holt's shoulder, an unusual gesture for the normally reserved man. I'll ride out at first light tomorrow. Check the approaches from the east. If Cordell's men are coming from that direction, I'll try to get word to you. Appreciate it, Holt said, but don't put yourself at risk. This isn't your fight. Abel's mouth quirked in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. In this country, a neighbor's trouble has a way of becoming everyone's trouble eventually. He glanced back toward the cabin door. Besides, I've got my own reasons for disliking men like Cordell. Before Holt could inquire further, Abel changed the subject. You should get some rest while you can. I'll keep watch for a few hours. Holt wanted to refuse. Protecting William was his responsibility. But exhaustion suddenly weighed on him like a physical burden. He hadn't slept in nearly 2 days, and his aging body was beginning to protest the abuse. A few hours' rest would sharpen his reflexes, which might make the difference if trouble came. Wake me at sunset, he finally agreed. And Abel, thanks. Abel merely nodded, settling himself on the porch with his rifle across his knees, his eyes already scanning the horizon with the particular alertness of a man accustomed to wilderness living. Inside, Holt found William awake, staring at the ceiling with an unreadable expression. He looked up as his father entered. Abel's keeping watch for a bit, Holt explained, sinking onto the chair beside the bed. Thought I'd get some shut-eye. William nodded, then said abruptly, You trust him? The question took Holt by surprise. Abel? Known him 15 years. He's solid. You can't be sure, William insisted, his voice low and intense. Cordell has people everywhere, pays for information. Holt studied his son's face, noting the tightness around his eyes, the way his gaze kept darting to the window despite his weakened state. Fear had become a companion to William, Holt realized. Not the momentary fear of a specific danger, but the constant grinding vigilance of prey. Abel Whitaker isn't bought that easy, he said firmly. Man lost his wife and son in the war. Lives off a small pension and what he grows himself. Not much interested in gold or anything else Cordell might offer. William didn't look convinced, but he subsided, either from acceptance or simply lack of energy to argue further. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice softer. Remember that old pocket watch you used to carry? The silver one with the engraving? Holt's hand moved automatically to his vest pocket, where the watch in question now resided. What about it? You told me once it was meant for me, for my 20th birthday. William's gaze met his father's directly for perhaps the first time since his return. I thought about that watch a lot while I was gone. Funny thing to fixate on, I guess. Holt withdrew this pocket watch, its silver case gleaming dully in the cabin's dim light. The engraving on the back reads simply, William Fletcher, with the date that would have been his 20th birthday. He'd purchased it in Cheyenne months in advance, planning to present it when William officially became a man in his eyes. Instead, the watch had remained in a drawer for nearly a year after William's departure, a painful reminder of plans disrupted and words unsaid. Only recently had Holt begun carrying it, though he couldn't have articulated exactly why. It's still yours, he said, holding it out. Bit late, but might keep better time than that old one you had. William hesitated, then reached out to accept the watch, his fingers brushing against Holt's in a touch that seemed to bridge more than just physical distance. He opened it carefully, studying the intricate movement visible beneath the glass face. It's beautiful, Pa, he said softly. Thank you. Something shifted in the air between them. Not forgiveness exactly, for there was still too much unspoken, too many hurts unaddressed, but a recognition, perhaps, that healing might be possible. Holt nodded acknowledgement, suddenly unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. He settled back in the chair, allowing his eyes to close at last. The last thing he saw before drifting into exhausted sleep was William holding the watch against his chest, as if it were something precious and fragile. Sleep came swiftly, but brought with it dreams of uncommon vividness. Holt found himself back in the cabin as it had been years ago, when Eleanor was alive and William still a boy. Eleanor sat by the fire, mending one of William's shirts, her face illuminated by the dancing flames. She looked up as Holt entered, her smile as warm and real as it had been in life. You found him, she said, her voice exactly as he remembered it. I knew you would. He found me, Holt corrected, settling beside her. And he's in trouble, Eleanor, deep trouble. She set aside her mending, reaching out to take his hand. Her touch felt impossibly real, warm and slightly rough from years of ranch work. Our boy was always good at finding trouble, she said with fond exasperation. But he's stronger than you think, Holt. Stronger than he knows himself. He's changed, Holt said, hardened. Some of the things he's done. We all carry shadows, Eleanor interrupted gently. You, me, William. It's not the shadows that define us, but how we face them. She looked toward the window, her expression growing distant. There's a storm coming, Holt. Not like yesterday's. Bigger. You'll need to be strong for both of you. I don't know if I can protect him, Holt admitted, voicing the fear he'd barely acknowledged to himself. Not from men like Cordell. Eleanor turned back to him, her eyes suddenly fierce. Then teach him to protect himself. Really protect himself. Not just with guns and fists, but here. She placed a hand over her heart. You've carried your own shadows too long alone, Holt. Don't let him make the same mistake. Before Holt could respond, the dream began to dissolve around him, Eleanor's face fading last, her eyes holding his until the very end. He woke with a start to find Abel shaking his shoulder gently. The cabin was bathed in the golden light of sunset, long shadows stretching across the floor like reaching fingers. Sun's going down, Abel said quietly. Thought you'd want to be up. Holt nodded, shaking off the lingering effects of the dream. He glanced toward the bed, finding William asleep, his breathing deeper and more regular than before. The silver pocket watch lay open on his chest, rising and falling with each breath. How's he been? Holt asked, keeping his voice low. Peaceful enough, Abel replied. Fever seems to be lessening. He's strong, your boy. Holt stood, stretching muscles stiff from sleeping in the uncomfortable chair. Anything out there I should know about? Abel's expression grew serious. Saw dust to the northwest about an hour ago. Rider moving fast, then gone. Could be nothing. Or could be a scout, Holt finished grimly, checking if the trail's gone cold. My thought exactly. Abel reached for his hat, which he'd placed on the table. I should head back before full dark. I'll return tomorrow as promised. Holt walked him to the door. Abel, he said as the older man mounted his horse. William mentioned that Cordell has a son about his age. Name of Adam. Any chance that it's my Adam? Abel shook his head, a shadow crossing his face. No, my boy died at Shiloh, as you know, but I understand your thinking. He settled his hat more firmly. Keep your guard up, Holt. And remember, men like Cordell, they don't fight fair. Never have. With that cryptic warning, Abel turned his horse and rode eastward, his figure gradually disappearing into the gathering dusk. Holt watched until he could no longer distinguish rider from landscape, then returned inside, bolting the door firmly behind him. The cabin felt different somehow in Abel's absence, the silence more pronounced. Holt moved to check on William, finding him still asleep, but with a more natural color to his face. The fever was indeed breaking, just as Abel had observed. Another small victory. As darkness claimed the land completely, Holt lit the oil lamp, keeping the flame low to avoid creating too visible a beacon. He prepared a simple meal, more out of habit than hunger, and settled back into the chair with his rifle across his lap. The night stretched ahead, long and uncertain. But for now, William breathed steadily. The cabin stood secure, and the stars emerged one by one above the Wyoming plains, silent witnesses to the vigil below. The night passed in tense vigilance, each sound from the darkness outside causing Holt to tighten his grip on the rifle. But dawn arrived without incident, spilling pale gold light through the cabin's single window. As the shadows retreated, Holt allowed himself to relax marginally, rolling his stiff shoulders and stretching his legs. William had slept through most of the night, waking only briefly when Holt changed his bandages. The fever had broken completely, leaving him exhausted but clear-headed. Now, as morning light filled the cabin, he struggled to sit up, grimacing at the pain in his side. Easy, Holt cautioned, moving quickly to assist him. That wound's still fresh. Can't lie here forever, William muttered, though he accepted his father's help in propping himself against the headboard. Need to start getting my strength back. Holt assessed his son with a critical eye. William was pale, with dark circles beneath his eyes speaking of the body's hard work of healing. But there was a new alertness in his gaze, a determination that boded well for his recovery. Hungry? Holt asked, already moving toward the stove. William nodded. Starving, actually. Holt prepared a more substantial breakfast than the broth of previous days, cornmeal mush sweetened with the last of his molasses and strong black coffee. As William ate with surprising appetite, Holt brought him up to date on Abel's visit in the dust sighting to the northwest. Could be a scout, William agreed, his expression darkening. Cordell always sends Adam ahead. The boy's good at tracking, better than most of the men. Abel's checking the eastern approaches today, Holt said. Should be here by midday with news. William nodded, though Holt didn't miss the flicker of unease that crossed his face at the mention of Abel. Despite Holt's assurances, William clearly remained suspicious of anyone connected to his father's life, a wariness born of hard experience. After eating, William insisted on trying to stand. The attempt was not entirely successful. He managed to get to his feet, but immediately swayed, his face draining of what little color it had regained. Holt caught him before he could fall, guiding him back to the bed. Stubborn as ever, Holt commented, though there was no real reproach in his tone. Wonder where I got that from, William retorted with a ghost of a smile. The small exchange, so reminiscent of their banter in easier times, hung in the air between them like a tenuous bridge. Holt found himself wanting to strengthen that connection, to rebuild what had been broken 3 years ago. While we're waiting on Abel, he said, settling back in the chair, might be a good time to clear the air between us. William's expression immediately closed, wariness replacing the momentary openness. Not much to say that hasn't been said. Plenty, Holt countered quietly. starting with how I handled things the night you left. William looked away, focusing on a point somewhere beyond the cabin wall. Ancient history, Pa. We were both angry, said things we didn't mean. Some we did mean, Holt persisted. I meant it when I said this land was all we had. You meant it when you said you'd die here if you stayed. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But I didn't mean to drive you away, and I never meant for you to think I wasn't proud of you. William remained silent, still not meeting Holt's gaze. His fingers worried at the edge of the blanket, betraying the emotions he was working to control. After your mother died, Holt continued, the words coming with difficulty after years of holding them inside, I was lost. She was always the one who understood you better, who knew how to talk to you. Without her, he shook his head. I fell back on the only thing I knew, being hard, demanding more, pushing you to be stronger. Because this country doesn't forgive weakness. I know that now, William said softly. Learned it the hard way. I should have found another way to teach you. Holt's voice roughened with emotion. Should have told you more often that you were doing good, that I saw how hard you worked, that I was damn proud of the man you were becoming. William finally looked at him, his eyes, so like Eleanor's, bright with unshed tears. Why are you telling me this now? Holt met his son's gaze steadily. Because I don't know how much time we have. Cordell's coming sooner or later, and I won't have us face whatever's coming with this still between us. For a long moment, William said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I've done things, Pa. Bad things, with Cordell's gang. Things that would make you ashamed to call me son. You're not the first man to lose his way, Holt said. The measure of a man isn't that he never falls, but that he finds the strength to get back up. Some things can't be made right, William insisted, a shadow of deep shame crossing his face. Maybe not, Holt acknowledged, but they can be faced, atoned for in time. He paused, then added, Your mother used to say that the hardest person to forgive is yourself. She was right about most things. William's expression softened at the mention of Eleanor. I miss her, he said simply, even after all this time. So do I, son. Every day. Another silence fell between them, but different now, contemplative rather than strained. William seemed to be weighing something in his mind, a decision hovering on the edge of utterance. There's something you should know, he finally said, about Cordell, about why he's really after me. He took a deep breath, wincing slightly at the pain it caused in his injured side. It's not just about the gold claim, though that's part of it. It's about what I saw, what I know. Holt waited, sensing the importance of whatever revelation was coming. Last winter, William continued, we were camped near a Shoshone settlement in the Wind Rivers. Peaceful folks who had a treaty with the government. They had found gold on their land. Not much, but enough to interest Cordell. His voice hardened. He arranged a meeting with their chief, supposedly to negotiate mining rights. Instead, he had his men open fire, killed 17 people, including women and children. Holt's blood ran cold at the matter-of-fact recitation of such brutality. You were there? William nodded, his expression haunted. I didn't know what was planned. When the shooting started, I tried to stop it, but he swallowed hard. Cordell knocked me unconscious. When I came to, it was over. He claimed the Indians had attacked first, that it was self-defense. But you knew otherwise, Holt said quietly. I knew. So did everyone there. But the others were willing to keep quiet, either because they believed Cordell's justification or because they were too scared to cross him. William's hands clenched into fists on the blanket. I kept my mouth shut too at first, told myself I had no choice, but it ate at me, Pa. Every night I'd see their faces in my dreams. That's why you really ran, Holt realized. Not just because of the gold. William nodded. I took the map as leverage, as protection. But what Cordell really fears is me talking to the Indian agent, or a marshal. There's an army outpost 2 days' ride from here. If I could get there, tell them what really happened. It would be your word against his, Holt pointed out, and Cordell has influence. I have proof, William countered. I took something from the camp after the massacre, the chief's peace medal given to him by President Grant himself. Cordell claimed the chief was wearing it when he attacked, but I know better. I saw Cordell take it from the chief's body after he was already dead. Where is this metal now? William's hand moved to the small leather pouch around his neck. In here, with the gold nuggets. Never let it out of my sight. Holt absorbed this new information, understanding now the true gravity of their situation. This wasn't just about a disputed gold claim or a vengeful employer. If William's account was accurate, Mason Cordell was a mass murderer willing to kill again to cover his tracks. Changing the story, Holt said slowly. We need to get you to that army outpost. William gave a harsh laugh that ended in a wince of pain. Easier said than done. I can barely stand, let alone ride. And Cordell's men are likely already closing in. Abel will bring news, Holt reminded him. We'll know more then. As if summoned by his name, a distinctive whistle sounded from outside. Abel's signal, a pattern they had established years ago. Holt moved immediately to the window, peering out cautiously before relaxing. It's Abel, he confirmed, unbolting the door. The old preacher entered the cabin with the wary alertness of a man who had seen trouble on the horizon. He nodded a greeting to William before turning to Holt, his expression grave. Riders coming, he said without preamble. 6, maybe 7, moving fast from the northwest. 2 hours out at most. Holt felt his stomach tighten. Cordell? Can't say for certain, Abel replied, but they're armed and traveling purposeful. Not the usual prospectors or trappers. William struggled to sit up straighter, his face setting into hard lines. It's them. Has to be. Abel studied William with shrewd eyes. You're looking better, son, but nowhere near ready to ride, which presents us with a problem. We fight, Holt said simply. Abel shook his head. 3 against 7, with one of us wounded? Those aren't odds I'd bet on, and I've made some foolish wagers in my time. We can't run, William pointed out. I can barely walk, let alone ride. A tense silence fell as the 3 men considered their limited options. Finally, Abel spoke, his voice thoughtful. When I was a chaplain during the war, he said, I learned that sometimes the best defense isn't a fight or a flight, but a deception. Make the enemy believe they've won before they've even engaged. Holt frowned. What are you suggesting? Abel's gaze moved to William, then back to Holt. Let them find what they're looking for, but not in the way they expect. A small, grim smile touched his lips. I have an idea, but you're not going to like it much. Over the next hour, Abel outlined his plan. As Holt had predicted, he didn't like it. Not one bit. It was risky, dependent on too many variables, and placed William in potential danger. But as they talked through the alternatives, he grudgingly admitted it might be their best chance. It's not just about surviving today, Abel reminded them. It's about ending this for good. Otherwise, Cordell will keep coming, and next time we might not have warning. William, despite his weakened state, argued forcefully in favor of the plan. I started this, he insisted. Let me finish it. By the time they had worked out the details, the sun had climbed high in the sky. Time was running short. If Abel's estimate was correct, Cordell's men would arrive within the hour. As Abel prepared to leave to set his part of the plan in motion, he paused at the door, fixing William with an intense gaze. You did wrong running with Cordell, he said bluntly. But standing against him now, that's the path to redemption, son. Not forgetting your sins, but facing them. William held the old man's gaze. I'm not looking for redemption, Reverend. Just trying to do one right thing in a long line of wrongs. Abel nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. That's usually how it starts. He clasped Holt's shoulder briefly. Remember, timing is everything. Wait for my signal. After Abel had gone, Holt and William worked on quickly to prepare, each lost in his own thoughts. As Holt checked and rechecked his rifle, he found himself remembering the dream of Eleanor from the night before. Her warning of a coming storm had proven prophetic. He hoped her faith in William's strength and his own would prove equally accurate. Pa, William said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. If this goes wrong, it won't, Holt interrupted firmly. If it does, William persisted, I want you to know something. He met his father's eyes directly, all the barriers of the past 3 years momentarily down. I never stopped thinking about home, about you. Even when I was angriest, even when I was doing things I knew would shame you, I carried this place with me. It was the measure I held myself against, even when I fell short. Holt felt something shift inside him, a knot of pain he had carried for so long that he had almost forgotten it was there. "This will always be your home, William," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "No matter what." A sudden distant report, a rifle shot, interrupted the moment. Both men tensed, listening intently. The shot was followed by another, then a third. Abel's signal. "They're here," Holt said grimly, moving to the window to peer out. In the distance, dust rose from the approach to the ranch. Riders, moving fast. The storm Eleanor had warned of was breaking upon them at last. William struggled to his feet, pain evident in every movement, but determination overriding it. "Time to see if this plan of Abel's is as crazy as it sounds," he said, reaching for the revolver Holt had placed on the table beside him. Father and son shared one last look, a lifetime of words compressed into a single glance, before taking their positions. The waiting was over. Now would come the reckoning. Holt positioned himself by the window, rifle trained on the approaching riders. Through the dust cloud, he could make out 6 men, just as Abel had predicted. They rode in tight formation, the lead rider slightly ahead of the others, a position of authority rather than scouting. "That'll be Cordell," William said from where he stood braced against the wall beside the door, revolver in hand. His face was pale with pain and exertion, but his eyes remained clear and focused. "The one in front always likes to lead the charge himself." Holt studied the approaching figure. Even at a distance, Mason Cordell cut an imposing silhouette, broad-shouldered and upright in the saddle, with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to command. Beside him rode a younger man whose resemblance to Cordell marked him clearly as the son William had mentioned. "Remember," Holt said quietly, "we need to make this convincing. Abel won't have much time." William nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Just like we planned." The riders slowed as they approached the cabin, spreading out to cover all potential escape routes. It was a practiced maneuver, executed with military precision. These were not common outlaws, but disciplined men who had worked together for some time. Cordell halted about 50 yards from the cabin, studying it with the calculating gaze of a predator assessing prey. After a moment, he raised his hand in signal, and one of his men rode forward, cupping his hands around his mouth. "Fletcher," the man called, "Mason Cordell wants a word with you." Holt stepped away from the window, out of sight but close enough to respond. "Got nothing to say to him," he shouted back. "This is private property. Ride on." There was a pause, then Cordell himself moved his horse forward. He was a striking figure up close, perhaps 60 years old but powerfully built, with a neatly trimmed white beard contrasting sharply with his tanned face. His eyes, even at a distance, were remarkably cold. "Mr. Fletcher," Cordell called, his voice cultured and controlled, carrying none of the frontier roughness Holt had expected. "I apologize for the intrusion. I'm looking for a man who used to work for me. Goes by Jack Keller, though I believe you know him by another name." Holt felt a chill at the confirmation that Cordell knew exactly who William was. "Don't know any Jack Keller," he replied, keeping his tone gruff and unwelcoming. "Now state your business or move on." Cordell smiled, a gesture that never reached his eyes. "My business, Mr. Fletcher, is the recovery of stolen property and the apprehension of a thief. I have reason to believe your son, William, is in possession of items belonging to me. Very valuable items." He spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. "I'm not an unreasonable man. Return what's mine, and we'll leave you in peace." "My son isn't here," Holt said flatly. "Haven't seen him in 3 years." "Now that," Cordell replied, "is a lie. We tracked him to your property yesterday. One of my men saw him enter your cabin." His voice hardened. "I don't appreciate being lied to, Mr. Fletcher." Beside the door, William tensed, his knuckles whitening around the grip of his revolver. Holt gave him a warning glance. "Not yet." "Whoever your man saw," Holt called, "it wasn't my son. Now I'm telling you one last time. This is private property. I'm within my rights to defend it." Cordell's false affability vanished, his expression turning to stone. "So be it." He raised his arm, and his men immediately drew their weapons. "Bring him out, Fletcher, or we burn the cabin with both of you inside." This was the moment their plan hinged on. Holt took a deep breath, then played his part. "Wait," he shouted. "Don't shoot. He's here, but he's hurt." Let me bring him out. Cordell's arm remained raised, but he didn't give the signal to fire. No tricks, Fletcher. My men will shoot at the first sign of trouble. Holt turned to William, who nodded grimly. It was time. Stay ready, Holt murmured, then raised his voice again. We're coming out. Don't shoot. He moved to William's side, supporting him as they stepped through the door onto the porch. The sunlight was blinding after the cabin's dimness, momentarily disorienting them both. William leaned heavily against his father, his face a mask of pain that required little acting. Cordell's cold eyes narrowed as he assessed the injured man before him. Hello, Jack, he said, his voice dripping with false concern. You've led us on quite a chase. William raised his head, meeting Cordell's gaze directly. It's over, Mason, he said, his voice stronger than Holt had expected. I'm done running. Yes, Cordell agreed, you are. He gestured to his men, who began to dismount. Adam, search him. The rest of you, secure the perimeter. Make sure our friend Mr. Fletcher doesn't have any surprises waiting. The younger Cordell approached cautiously, one hand resting on the revolver at his hip. He was perhaps 25, with his father's build but sharper features and a coldness in his eyes that seemed out of place in one so young. As he reached the porch, his gaze flicked between William and Holt, assessing the potential threat. Hands where I can see them, old man, he ordered Holt, his voice carrying the arrogance of youth backed by power. Holt slowly raised his hands, allowing William to support himself against the porch railing. The movement caused William to grimace in genuine pain, his bandaged side clearly troubling him. Adam Cordell patted William down roughly, paying particular attention to the leather pouch visible around his neck. With a triumphant smirk, he yanked it free, breaking the cord. Got it, Pa, he called, holding up the pouch. Mason Cordell's expression remained impassive, but a gleam of satisfaction entered his cold eyes. Bring it here, he commanded. As Adam turned to obey, William locked eyes with Holt, giving him the briefest of nods. Now, in a single fluid movement that belied his injured state, William dropped to the porch floor just as Holt drew the hidden revolver from the back of his waistband. The first shot caught Adam Cordell in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending the pouch flying from his hand. Chaos erupted instantly. Cordell's men opened fire, bullets splintering the wood of the porch as Holt dragged William back through the doorway. Outside, Adam Cordell staggered to his horse, clutching his bleeding shoulder, while Mason shouted orders above the gunfire. Get down, Holt commanded, pushing William toward the relative safety beneath the window. He took up position beside it, returning fire with measured shots, meant to keep the attackers at bay rather than hit them. The pouch, William gasped, his face contorted with the pain of his sudden exertion. Did you see where it fell? Holt risked a glance through the window. The small leather pouch lay in the dust of the yard, directly between the cabin and Cordell's position. Retrieving it would mean crossing open ground under fire, a suicide mission. Leave it, Holt said, not worth dying for. William's expression hardened. Everything depends on what's in that pouch. The piece metal, the map, it's the only leverage we have. Before Holt could respond, a new sound cut through the gunfire, a high, piercing whistle that he recognized immediately. Abel's signal coming from somewhere behind the cabin. He's in position, Holt said grimly. Time for the next part. William nodded, gathering at his strength. The plan they had devised with Abel was risky and depended on perfect timing, but it was their best hope of turning the tables on the superior force outside. Holt moved to the rear window, keeping low to avoid the bullets still striking the cabin walls. Through it, he could just make out Abel's position among the rocks that bordered the creek at the edge of the property. The old preacher had his Sharps rifle braced and ready, covering the back approach to the cabin, exactly as planned. Now, Holt shouted to William, then fired 3 rapid shots through the front window, forcing Cordell and his men to take cover. William staggered to the back door, threw it open, and fired 2 shots into the air, their signal to Abel that they were executing the plan. Then he stumbled outside, making for the cover of the nearby stable as if attempting to escape. The reaction from Cordell's men was immediate. 2 riders broke from the main group, circling wide to cut off William's apparent flight. They rode directly into Abel's line of fire. 2 shots cracked from the rocks, so close together they sounded almost as one. Both riders fell, one dead before he hit the ground, the other clutching his leg and screaming in pain. The diversion worked exactly as intended. In the momentary confusion, Holt burst through the front door of the cabin, diving for the leather pouch that still lay in the dust. Bullets kicked up dirt around him as Cordell's remaining men opened fire, but their shots went wide in their surprise. Holt's fingers closed around the pouch just as a bullet grazed his arm, tearing through his sleeve and leaving a burning furrow in his flesh. Ignoring the pain, he rolled to his feet and sprinted back to the cabin, bullets tracking his movement. Inside, he slammed the door shut just as a volley of shots splintered the frame. Breathing hard, he checked the contents of the pouch. Several gold nuggets, and more importantly, a silver medal bearing the profile of President Grant, the proof William had spoken of. Outside, Mason Cordell's voice rose above the diminishing gunfire. "Cease fire! Cease fire, damn you!" The shooting stopped, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the moans of the wounded rider and the nervous whinnying of horses. "Fletcher," Cordell called, "this accomplishes nothing. You're outnumbered and surrounded. Send out my property and William, and the rest of you can walk away from this." Holt moved to the side window, careful to stay out of sight. From this angle, he could see that Cordell had taken cover behind a water trough, while his three remaining men were spread out around the cabin. Adam Cordell was nowhere to be seen, likely sent to safety after being wounded. More importantly, Holt could see William had successfully reached the stable and was now inside, hopefully making his way to the prearranged position. Abel, too, had shifted position, moving to higher ground where his Sharps rifle could command a wider field of fire. The plan was working, but the most dangerous part was yet to come. "Cordell!" Holt shouted back. "You're the one who's trapped. 2 of your men are down, and my friend in the rocks has the rest of you in his sights." A stream of profanity was Cordell's only response, followed by a tense silence as he reassessed his position. Holt used the moment to reload his revolver and rifle, mentally preparing for what came next. When Cordell spoke again, his voice had regained its controlled calm, which somehow seemed more menacing than his anger. "Let's be reasonable, Fletcher. This isn't your fight. It's between me and your son. He stole from me, betrayed my trust. Surely you understand the principle, even if you don't approve of my methods." "My son says different," Holt replied. "Says you massacred innocent people for their gold. Says he has proof." There was a pause, then Cordell laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Is that what he told you? That I'm some kind of savage who murders innocents? And you believed him?" His voice hardened. "Your son is a thief and a liar, Fletcher. He's trying to turn you against me to save his own skin." "Maybe," Holt allowed, keeping Cordell talking while he watched for William's signal from the stable. "But I'm inclined to believe my own blood over a stranger who comes shooting up my property." "A touching sentiment," Cordell replied sarcastically, "but misplaced. Ask your son about Sweetwater Creek. Ask him who fired the first shot there. Ask him whose hands are really stained with innocent blood." Holt frowned, momentarily thrown by Cordell's confident tone. William had described the massacre in detail, painting Cordell as the instigator and himself as an unwilling witness. But there was something in Cordell's voice, a certainty, a righteousness, that gave Holt pause. No, he told himself firmly. This was exactly what Cordell wanted. To sow doubt, to divide father from son. He would not fall for it. A flicker of movement from the stable caught Holt's attention. A mirror flashed 3 times in the shadowy interior. William signaled that he was in position and ready. Almost simultaneously, a similar signal came from Abel's position in the rocks. It was time for the final gambit. "Cordell," Holt called, "I'm sending my son out, but I keep the pouch until he's safely away." A moment of silence followed, then Cordell's cautious reply. "Send him out unarmed. My quarrel's not with you, Fletcher." Never was. Holt took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. The next few minutes would determine everything. He moved to the front door, opening it slowly with his hands clearly visible. "He's coming out the back," Holt announced. "Don't shoot." Cordell gestured to his remaining men, sending one to verify William's emergence from the rear of the cabin. As the man moved cautiously around the side of the building, Holt counted silently in his head. 3, 2, 1. A single shot rang out from the stable, dropping the flanking man with a bullet to the leg. Almost simultaneously, a shot from Abel's position disabled another of Cordell's men. leaving only Mason Cordell himself and one remaining gunman. Cordell reacted with impressive speed, diving for better cover as he drew his revolver. "Kill them all," he shouted to his remaining man. "No prisoners." The gunman opened fire on the cabin, forcing Holt back inside. Outside, chaos reigned as William fired again from the stable, pinning down Cordell's last man. Abel, too, kept up a steady fire from his position, effectively cutting off any retreat. Their plan had worked almost perfectly, turning Cordell's superior numbers against him by splitting his forces and picking them off one by one. But Mason Cordell himself remained unwounded and dangerous, a cornered predator with nothing to lose. Through the window, Holt saw Cordell make a desperate dash toward the horses, clearly intending to escape while his remaining man provided covering fire. Without hesitation, Holt raised his rifle and fired, the bullet striking Cordell's leg and sending him sprawling in the dust. For a moment, everything stilled. Cordell lay motionless, his white beard stained with dirt and blood. His last man, seeing his employer fallen, threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. "Don't shoot," the man called. "I'm done. I yield." William emerged cautiously from the stable, his revolver trained on the surrendering man. Abel, too, appeared from his position among the rocks, his Sharps rifle still at the ready. The sudden quiet was almost more jarring than the previous chaos. Dust hung in the air, mingling with the acrid smell of gunpowder. On the ground, Cordell stirred, pushing himself up on one elbow while clutching his wounded leg. Holt stepped out onto the porch, rifle still raised. "It's over, Cordell," he called. "Your men are dead or captured." Cordell looked up, his cold eyes now burning with undisguised hatred. "This changes nothing, Fletcher. You're harboring a murderer. Your precious son has blood on his hands that will never wash clean." William limped forward, his wounded side clearly paining him, but his gun steady as he approached Cordell. "It's finished, Mason," he said quietly. "The army will hear about what happened at the Shoshone camp. The Indian agent will get the peace medal. It's done." Cordell laughed, a harsh sound edged with pain. "You think this is about some dead Indians? You think that's why I've hunted you?" He shook his head, almost pitying. "You never understood, did you, Jack? It was never about the gold, or the Indians, or your betrayal." His gaze shifted to Holt, standing watchful on the porch. "It was about him. It was always about him." A cold weight settled in Holt's stomach at the hatred in Cordell's eyes. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, descending the steps to stand beside William. Cordell smiled, a terrible grimace that held no mirth, only vindictive satisfaction at finally revealing a long-held secret. "Ask your father about Sweetwater Mine, William. Ask him about his partner 20 years ago. Ask him what happened to the man who trusted him with everything, only to be left with nothing." William looked at Holt, confusion evident in his face. "Pa?" Before Holt could respond, a movement behind Cordell caught his eye, a figure rising up from behind a water trough, revolver in hand. Adam Cordell, wounded but not out of the fight. "William!" Holt shouted, throwing himself forward without conscious thought, pushing his son aside as Adam's gun barked once, twice. The impact felt like a hammer blow to Holt's chest, spinning him around and dropping him to the dust. Through suddenly blurred vision, he saw William return fire, watched Adam Cordell jerk and fall, his young face registering surprise before going slack in death. "No!" Mason Cordell's agonized cry echoed across the yard as he crawled toward his fallen son, heedless of his own wound, of the guns still trained on him. "Adam! Adam, no!" In that moment, Holt glimpsed something genuinely authentic in Cordell's expression. Not cruelty or hatred, but the pure agony of a father losing his child. Even as enemies, Holt couldn't help but recognize the parallel between Cordell's present pain and his own these past 3 years. Cordell cradled his son's body, ignoring the blood soaking into his shirt. "It wasn't supposed to be you," he mumbled, his voice breaking. "Never you." Holt tried to rise but found his limbs strangely unresponsive. A spreading warmth soaked his shirt, and breathing suddenly required immense effort. Dimly he was aware of William kneeling beside him, his son's face a mask of panic and grief. Pa, stay with me." William's voice seemed to come from very far away. Holt tried to speak, to tell his son it would be all right, but no words came. Instead, a strange peace began to settle over him. dulling the pain and softening the edges of his vision. Eleanor, he thought, is this what you felt at the end? Darkness crept in from the corners of his awareness, but not before he saw Abel appear, the old preacher's weathered face grave as he assessed Holt's wounds. Not before he heard William's desperate pleas for him to hold on. Not before he felt his son's tears falling warm against his rapidly cooling skin. His last conscious thought was a prayer, wordless but profound, for William's safety, for his future, for his forgiveness of Cordell, of Holt himself, and most importantly, of his own past actions. Then darkness claimed him entirely, and Holt Fletcher knew no more. Holt floated in darkness, untethered from pain and worry. Time had no meaning in this void. He might have been there for seconds or centuries. Gradually, however, awareness returned, bringing with it not the searing agony he expected, but a curious warmth that enveloped him like a familiar blanket. Light began to filter through the darkness, not bright or harsh, but soft and golden, like sunset on the Wyoming plains. As his vision cleared, Holt found himself standing on the porch of his cabin, but the structure before him was not the weathered shelter he had built with his own hands. This cabin gleamed with fresh-cut timber, the windows whole and clean, smoke curling invitingly from the stone chimney. Around it, the land was as he remembered from years past, verdant and alive, untouched by drought or hardship. "You always did good work with your hands," a voice said from behind him, a voice he had heard only in dreams for the past decade. Holt turned, his heart constricting painfully at the sight of Eleanor standing there, looking exactly as she had before illness had claimed her. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, her eyes, William's eyes, bright with the quiet humor that had first drawn him to her all those years ago. "Eleanor," he whispered, reaching for her, half expecting his hand to pass through her like a ghost. Instead, his fingers touched solid warmth, real and substantial. She smiled, covering his hand with her own. "Hello, Holt." "I never blamed you," she said softly, as if reading his thoughts. "Not for the sickness, not for staying at the ranch." "I should have taken you to Denver," Holt said, the old regret rising. "Should have sold everything. Gotten you away." Eleanor placed her fingers against his lips, stopping the self-reproach. "And I would have died far from home, far from those I loved. It was my choice, Holt, to die on our land, under our stars." She smiled, her eyes clear now, with no trace of the disease that had claimed her life. William didn't understand that then. The boy needed someone to blame, and you took that burden. But it wasn't your fault, never was. "Am I dead?" he asked bluntly, never one to shy from direct questions. Eleanor's smile turned wistful. "Not yet. You're walking the border country, the space between what was and what will be." "William," Holt said urgently, memories of the gunfight flooding back. "Cordell." "Shh," Eleanor soothed, leading him to the porch steps where they sat together as they had done countless evenings in their shared life. "There's nothing you can do for him now except trust that you've given him the strength to face what comes." Holt stared out at the idealized version of their land, struggling to accept the situation. "I can't leave him," he insisted. "Not like this, with so much unsaid." "More was said than you think," Eleanor replied gently. "Words matter, Holt, but so do actions. You stepped in front of a bullet for our son. That says more than any words could." The truth of her statement gave him pause. He had acted without thought, driven by instinct and love deeper than conscious decision. Would William understand that? Would he recognize it as the declaration it was? "He's still in danger," Holt protested. "Cordell is facing his own reckoning," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "Just as you are facing yours." Holt looked at her sharply. "My reckoning?" Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Mason Cordell didn't hunt our son just for gold or to silence him about the massacre. You heard him yourself. This was about you, about something that happened at Sweetwater Mine 20 years ago." The old guilt rose in Holt's chest, a familiar ache he had carried for decades. "I never thought it would come back like this," he said quietly. "Never thought he would find William." "The past rarely stays buried," Eleanor said. "You know that better than most." Holt stood, unable to remain still with the weight of memory pressing down upon him. He paced the porch, the boards solid beneath his feet despite the unreality of the entire situation. I should have told William the truth years ago about Sweetwater, about Cordell. Maybe then, maybe, Eleanor agreed, watching him with compassion. Or maybe it would have changed nothing. We can't know the paths not taken, Holt. We can only walk the one before us. Holt stopped his pacing, turning to face her directly. Why are you here, Eleanor? Why am I here instead of just moving on? He gestured vaguely at the golden light that seemed to surround the entire scene. Eleanor rose, moving to stand before him. Up close, she was so vibrantly real that it physically hurt to look at her, every detail exactly as he remembered, from the small scar at her temple to the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. Because you need to understand before you can choose, she said simply. Choose what? Whether to fight your way back or to come with me. Her expression softened with infinite tenderness. I've missed you, Holt, every day, but our son needs you still. Holt felt torn between longing and duty, between the peace Eleanor offered and the struggle that awaited if he returned. How do I know what's right? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. How do I choose? By remembering who you are, Eleanor replied. By understanding that the love that drove you to step in front of that bullet is the same love that will give William the strength to face whatever comes, whether you're physically beside him or not. She took his hand, leading him toward the cabin door. Come, there is something you need to see. The interior of the cabin was bathed in the same golden light, warm and welcoming. But instead of the familiar furnishings of their shared home, the space contained what appeared to be a window, though not one that looked outside. Through it, Holt could see his actual cabin, dimly lit by a single oil lamp. On his bed lay his own body, pale and still, chest heavily bandaged. Beside it, William sat in the same chair where Holt had kept vigil over him days earlier. The role reversal struck Holt with painful clarity. William looked exhausted, his face haggard with worry and grief. One hand rested on Holt's motionless arm, while the other held the silver pocket watch Holt had given him. Abel stood nearby, mixing something in a cup, medicine presumably, though from Holt's detached perspective, he knew no earthly remedy could heal the damage Cordell's bullet had done. He hasn't left your side, Eleanor said softly. Not once in the 3 days since you were shot. 3 days? Holt's surprise was genuine. Time truly had no meaning in this in-between place. Eleanor nodded. Abel managed to remove one bullet, but the other is too deep. The doctor from town said there's nothing to be done except wait and pray. A small smile touched her lips. William has done both, more fervently than you might expect from a boy who claimed to have lost his faith years ago. Holt watched as William leaned forward, speaking to the unconscious form on the bed. Though no sound came through the strange window, Holt could read the words on his son's lips. Don't you leave me, Pa. Not yet. Not like this. The raw pain in William's expression cut through Holt's heart like a blade. He blames himself, he realized aloud. Of course he does, Eleanor replied. He's your son. Carrying the weight of the world is a Fletcher family tradition. Her tone held gentle reproach mingled with fondness. You both always did insist on bearing your burdens alone. What happened to Cordell? Holt asked, still watching the scene before him. Abel and William took him prisoner, along with his surviving men. The army arrived yesterday, alerted by Abel's message sent before the attack. They've taken Cordell to the fort to face charges for the massacre. Holt nodded, relieved that at least that part of their plan had succeeded. And Adam? Cordell's son? Eleanor's expression turned somber. William buried him beneath the oak tree, alongside the others who fell that day. He said no man, no matter his deeds, should lie unburied under open sky. The information surprised Holt, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Despite everything William had endured, despite the hardness he had developed, his essential compassion remained intact. Another piece of Eleanor living on in their son. I need to go back, Holt said, the decision crystallizing within him with sudden clarity. William needs to hear the truth about Cordell, about everything, from me. Eleanor smiled, though her eyes shone with unshed tears. I knew you would say that. Can I? He asked urgently. Is it possible? The bullet did terrible damage, Holt, she cautioned. Even if you return, you may not have much time. The pain will be considerable. Holt set his jaw stubbornly. I don't need much time, just enough to say what needs saying. Eleanor studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Always so determined, she murmured, reaching up to touch his face with infinite gentleness. It's one of the things I loved most about you. Will I see you again? He asked, covering her hand with his own, suddenly desperate to prolong their reunion. When it's truly time, she promised. I'll be waiting. We all will. All? Eleanor smiled mysteriously. Time means little where I am, Holt. Family even less. Love is the only currency that matters. She stood on tiptoe, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that contained all the warmth and tenderness of their years together. Holt closed his eyes, savoring the contact, knowing it might be long years before he felt it again. When he opened them, Eleanor was gone, and the golden light was fading. The cabin, the strange window, all of it dissolved around him, replaced by encroaching darkness. But unlike the void from which he had emerged, this darkness pulsed with pain, real, physical, and agonizing. Holt gasped, the simple act of drawing breath sending fire through his chest. His eyes flew open to see the rough-hewn ceiling of his actual cabin, illuminated by the flickering glow of an oil lamp. Pa? William's voice cracked with disbelief and desperate hope. Pa, can you hear me? Holt turned his head with monumental effort, finding his son's face. Haggard, unshaven, eyes red-rimmed from weeping or lack of sleep, or both. William gripped his hand with almost painful intensity, as if by sheer force of will, he could anchor his father to the world of the living. William, Holt managed, his voice a barely audible rasp. Son? Abel, William called over his shoulder, never taking his eyes from his father's face. He's awake. Get water quickly. Footsteps sounded, and Abel appeared, his expression a mixture of astonishment and cautious joy. Well, I'll be damned, the old preacher murmured. Welcome back, Fletcher. As Abel hurried to fetch water, William leaned closer, his eyes searching his father's face with desperate intensity. They said you wouldn't wake up, he said, his voice breaking. The doctor said the bullet was too close to your heart, that there was nothing to be done. Holt managed a weak smile. Doctors don't know everything, he whispered. Needed to come back. Things to tell you. Save your strength, William urged. There'll be time for talk when you're stronger. But Holt knew better. He could feel the truth of Eleanor's warning in the labored beating of his heart, in the wet rattle that accompanied each breath. His time was limited, measured in minutes rather than days. No, he insisted, tightening his grip on William's hand. Listen now, about Cordell, about why he really came. William's expression tightened with concern, but he nodded, recognizing the urgency in his father's voice. I'm listening, Pa. Abel returned with water, carefully lifting Holt's head to help him drink. The cool liquid was a blessing on his parched throat, but even this small movement sent waves of agony through his chest. When he'd managed a few sips, Abel gently lowered him back to the pillow. I'll be outside, the old preacher said quietly, understanding that what would follow was meant for William's ears alone. Call if you need me. As Abel's footsteps receded, Holt gathered what strength remained to him. The pain in his chest was a living thing, clawing at him with each heartbeat, but he pushed it aside through sheer force of will. This was more important. Sweetwater Mine, he began, his voice thin but determined. 20 years ago, before you were born. William leaned closer, intent on catching every word. Cordell mentioned it, said to ask you about your partner. Holt nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. Mason Cordell was that partner. We were young men then, full of dreams and ambition. Found a promising silver claim in the Sweetwater region. Formed a partnership. He paused, gathering strength for the difficult part of the story. William waited patiently, though his eyes betrayed his hunger to understand the connection that had brought such violence to their doorstep. The claim proved richer than we imagined, Holt continued. Silver vein wider and deeper than anything in the territory. We were going to be rich men. A bitter smile crossed his face. That's when the trouble started. What happened? William prompted gently when Holt fell silent, lost in memories. Cordell wanted to expand quickly, bring in more investors, build a larger operation. I was more cautious, wanted to develop the claim slowly, keep control in our hands. Holt's breathing grew more labored, each word costing him dearly. We argued. Things got heated. Then Cordell brought in outside investors without consulting me, sold shares in the mine that weren't his to sell. William's brow furrowed. He cheated you. Yes, and when I confronted him, he tried to buy me out for a fraction of the claim's worth. Holt closed his eyes briefly, the memory still sharp despite the decades that had passed. I refused, threatened to expose his deception to the investors. That night, someone set fire to the mine office with all our documentation inside. The only copies of the original claim papers, the partnership agreement, everything gone. Cordell, William said, the name a curse on his lips. Never could prove it, Holt replied. But yes, had to be him. Without those papers, it was his word against mine. And he had powerful friends by then. Men with money and influence. Holt's face darkened at the recollection. Court ruled in his favor. I lost everything, my share in the mine, my savings, nearly my reputation. Oh, William absorbed this in silence, pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. So when I unknowingly joined his gang, when he learned my real name, he saw an opportunity for revenge, Holt confirmed. Not just against me, but against my bloodline. The son paying for the father's sins. A coughing fit seized him then, sending fresh agony through his chest. When it passed, he tasted blood in his mouth, a dire sign he chose not to share with William. But why wait so long, William asked. Why not come after you years ago? Holt's lips twisted in a grim smile. He did, in his way. After I lost the case, no one would partner with me, lend to me, hire me. Cordell made sure of that. Had to leave Colorado, start over in Wyoming territory. His eyes met William's, conveying the weight of his next words. That's where I met your mother. Where we built this place had you. In running from my past, I found my future. William's expression softened at the mention of Eleanor. And Cordell? What happened to him? He got rich, as expected, turned the Sweetwater mine into one of the largest operations in Colorado. But silver prices fell, and he lost nearly everything in the panic of '73. Holt paused, gathering strength. After that, he disappeared from public view. I assumed he'd moved on, maybe back east. Never imagined he'd turn to outlawry. Never dreamed he'd cross paths with you. The cruel irony of it all hung in the air between them. How William, running from his father, had unwittingly placed himself in the hands of the man who hated Holt most in the world. How Cordell must have savored the discovery of whose son he had in his gang. So the massacre at the Shoshone camp, William said slowly. My confession about finding gold. He used those things to control me, to keep me close, all while knowing exactly who I was. Playing the long game, Holt agreed, his voice weakening. Cordell was always patient when revenge was concerned. I don't know, Holt continued, his voice growing fainter. If Cordell truly loves his son, but what I do know is that he turned him into a tool for his vengeance. He paused to catch his breath. Much as I almost did with you, in a different way. William frowned. What do you mean? When I forced you to live by my ways, anchored to this land, I didn't realize I was trying to make you into another version of yourself. Holt gripped at William's hand. Adam didn't have the choice you did, the courage to leave, to find his own path. And the price of them, William said, his voice dropping, was 3 years apart. A price worth paying, Holt whispered, so you wouldn't become like Adam Cordell, forever imprisoned by his father's wishes. William's face darkened with anger and self-recrimination. I should have seen it, should have realized. No, Holt interrupted with unexpected vehemence. This isn't on you, son. It's on me, for not telling you about Sweetwater years ago, for not warning you that there were men in this world who might hurt you just for bearing my name. He reached up with trembling fingers to touch William's face. I thought I was protecting you by keeping silent. Just one more mistake in a lifetime of them. William caught his father's hand, holding it against his cheek. You've made fewer mistakes than most, Pa, and you've paid for them more dearly than any man should. A moment of silence stretched between them, broken only by Holt's labored breathing. Outside, the first fingers of dawn were beginning to brush the eastern horizon, pale light seeping through the cabin window. Cordell, Holt finally asked, what will happen to him now? William's expression hardened. The Army's taken him to Fort Laramie to stand trial. With the peace medal as evidence and my testimony about the massacre, he'll hang. A shadow crossed his face. I almost wish. What? Holt prompted. I almost wish I hadn't killed Adam, William admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper. The boy was following his father's example, same as I tried to follow yours. Doesn't seem right that he paid the ultimate price while Mason gets the formality of a trial. Holt understood the sentiment, but he shook his head slightly. You did what you had to, William. Adam made his choice when he drew on you. He paused, searching for the right words. The killing weighs on you, that's good. Means you haven't lost yourself completely to the life you've been leading. William looked away, unable to meet his father's gaze. I've done terrible things, Pa, things that should weigh on me, but sometimes don't. That scares me more than anything. How easy it got to be. Look at me, Holt commanded with surprising strength. When William reluctantly met his eyes, he continued, we all walk dark paths sometimes. The measure of a man isn't that he never strays, but that he finds his way back to the light. Your mother's words, William said softly, recognition in his eyes. Holt managed a small smile. She was wiser than both of us put together. His smile faded as another wave of pain washed through him, more intense than before. He could feel his tenuous hold on life slipping, the borrowed time Eleanor had granted him running out. William, there's something else I need to tell you. Something important. William leaned closer, alarmed by the sudden urgency in his father's tone and the gray pallor spreading across his features. What is it, Pa? The silver pocket watch, Holt whispered, each word an effort now. Inside the case, look there. With a puzzled expression, William retrieved the watch from his pocket, carefully opening the back of the case where Holt indicated. His eyes widened as he discovered a folded paper tucked inside, yellowed with age. What is this? He asked, gently removing and unfolding it. Deed to this land, Holt explained, his voice fading, and to the parcel adjoining it to the north. 160 acres. Good water rights. I bought it years ago, thinking to expand the ranch when you were ready to run your own cattle. His eyes held William's, conveying what words alone could not. It's yours now, always was. The revelation struck William like a physical blow. All those years ago, their fateful argument had centered on Holt's refusal to sell land for William's gold-seeking venture. Yet all along, Holt had been secretly preparing a legacy for him, a future on the land, but one that would have been William's to shape as he saw fit. William's voice broke, overwhelmed by the implications and by the depth of love this simple act represented. Holt's breathing had grown more labored, his words emerging in pained gasps. Land endures, son. Gold comes and goes. But this place. His gaze drifted to the window where dawn was now breaking fully over the Wyoming plains. This place will be here long after we're gone, a foundation to build on. We'll build it together, William insisted, gripping his father's hand tightly, as if he could physically prevent Holt from slipping away. Once you're stronger. No, Holt interrupted gently. My trail ends here, William. We both know it. Terror flashed across William's face, quickly replaced by determination. I'll get Abel. We'll send for the doctor again. William, the single word spoken with unexpected strength, stopped him mid-sentence. Holt's eyes, though clouded with pain, were calm and resolute. I've made my peace with this. Made my choice. What choice? William demanded, desperation edging his voice. You can't choose to die, Pa. A small smile touched Holt's lips. Saw your mother, he said simply. She was waiting for me. Still is. But I came back to tell you what you needed to know. His hand tightened on William's with surprising strength. To tell you I'm proud of you. Always have been. William's composure finally broke, tears streaming down his face. Don't go, he pleaded. Not yet. There's so much I still need to say, to ask. You'll find your answers, Holt assured him, his voice growing fainter. In time, in this land, in the choices you make from here. His gaze drifted past William to something only he could see, his expression softening with wonder. She's here again, your mother, beautiful as ever. William turned instinctively, seeing nothing but the sunlight streaming through the cabin window. When he looked back, Holt's eyes had closed, his expression peaceful in a way William had never seen in life. Pa, he whispered. the word catching in his throat. But Holt Fletcher had slipped away, crossing the border between worlds one final time, not in the chaos of battle, but in the quiet dawn of a Wyoming morning, with his son beside him and his beloved waiting to guide him home. Outside, as if sensing the passage of a kindred spirit, Ember released a single, mournful whinny that echoed across the still morning air. Inside the cabin, William Fletcher bowed his head over his father's lifeless hand and wept. Not just for the loss, but for the understanding that had come too late, and for the second chance he'd been granted, but would now have to walk alone. Or perhaps not entirely alone, for in that moment of deepest grief, William could have sworn he felt the gentle pressure of a hand on his shoulder, too substantial to be mere imagination, too ephemeral to be truly real. A father's final reassurance, or a mother's eternal comfort. Perhaps both. 1 year later, the Wyoming autumn painted the landscape in gold and amber, the aspens trembling with leaves the color of flame. A lone rider crested the ridge overlooking the Fletcher Ranch, reining his horse to a stop to survey the changes below. William Fletcher no longer resembled the wounded, desperate man who had dragged himself to his father's doorstep a year before. The hardness remained in his face, but it was tempered now by something else. A quiet dignity, a sense of purpose that softened the sharp edges grief had carved into him. Beside him rode Abel Whitaker, the old preacher's weathered face creased in a rare smile as they gazed down at the ranch. "You've done good work here, son," he observed, nodding toward the improvements visible even from a distance. The cabin had been expanded, a new wing added to the east side, fresh paint brightened the weathered wood, and a proper corral now stood where once there had been only a simple pen. Smoke rose from the chimney, curling lazily into the clear autumn sky. "Couldn't have done it without your help," William replied, genuinely grateful for the old man's steady presence over the past year. After Holt's death, it had been Abel who had helped arrange the funeral, who had stood beside William as they laid his father to rest beneath the oak tree, who had stayed on when the grief threatened to overwhelm the younger man. "You did the work," Abel countered. "I just provided the occasional word of advice." William smiled slightly, and the occasional kick in the backside when I needed it. Abel chuckled, not denying the charge. There had been dark days in the months following Holt's death, days when William had questioned everything, when the weight of his past and the uncertainty of his future had pressed down upon him with crushing force. Abel had been there through it all, dispensing tough love and quiet wisdom in equal measure. They rode down toward the ranch, the horses picking their way carefully along the slope. As they approached, the front door of the cabin opened, and a woman emerged onto the porch. Emma Wilson, a widow from the nearest settlement, waved in greeting, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're late," she called, her tone scolding, but her eyes warm. "Hupper's nearly ready, and I won't have it spoiling because you two couldn't keep track of time." William dismounted, removing his hat respectfully as he approached. "Sorry, Emma. Cattle drive took longer than expected. The buyer was particular about the counting." Emma's expression softened. She had come to the ranch 6 months earlier, initially just to help with household matters a few days a week. William, lacking his father's self-sufficient skills in cooking and mending, had been grateful for the assistance. Over time, her visits had become more frequent, her presence a quiet comfort in the empty spaces Holt had left behind. "Well, you're here now," she said, gesturing them inside. "And I've got a letter for you, William, from Fort Laramie." William's expression turned serious as he followed Emma into the cabin, Abel close behind. The mention of Fort Laramie inevitably brought thoughts of Mason Cordell and the unfinished business that still lingered like a shadow at the edges of William's new life. Inside, the cabin's transformation was even more apparent than it had been from outside. Though still modest by any standard, it now boasted proper furniture, curtains at the windows, and a general air of care that had been absent in Holt's bachelor existence. On the mantel above the fireplace, 2 photographs in simple frames held places of honor. Eleanor Fletcher in her youth, and Holt in his later years, his weathered face stern, but his eyes betraying a quiet dignity. Emma retrieved an official-looking envelope from the table and handed it to William. "Arrived yesterday. I didn't open it, of course." William nodded his thanks, breaking the seal with a mixture of anticipation and dread. He scanned the contents quickly, his expression giving nothing away. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully and placed it in his shirt pocket. "Cordell's been sentenced," he said simply. hanging scheduled for next month. Abel nodded solemnly. Justice comes even if it takes its time. They want me there, William added, to witness. Emma's concerned gaze met his. Will you go? William moved to the window, looking out at the land that was now truly his, not just legally, but in the bone-deep sense of belonging that had been his father's final gift to him. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me says it's necessary, to see it through to the end, to know for certain it's over. He turned back to face them. But another part wants to leave the past in the past. Abel finished for him, understanding in his eyes. No shame in that, son. William nodded, grateful for the old man's insight. I have a month to decide, he said, deliberately shifting the conversation. Right now, I'm more interested in that supper Emma's been threatening us with. Emma smiled, recognizing his need to set aside the weight of the past, if only temporarily. Sit down then, both of you, and wash up first. You smell like cattle and trail dust. As they settled around the table minutes later, the rich aroma of beef stew and fresh bread filling the cabin, William found himself struck by the strange turns life had taken. A year ago, he had been a wanted man, running for his life, carrying the burden of his mistakes and regrets. Now he sat in his cabin, sharing a meal with people who had become something like family. The meal passed pleasantly, with Abel regaling them with stories from his circuit-riding preacher days, and Emma gently teasing both men about their bachelor ways. William contributed little to the conversation, content to listen and observe, to exist in this moment of simple communion. After supper, as Emma cleared the dishes and Abel stepped outside for his evening pipe, William found himself drawn to the mantel, to the photographs that watched over the cabin with silent benevolence. He lifted his father's picture, studying the familiar features that had begun to blur slightly in his memory, despite his best efforts to hold them clear. I wish you could see this, Pa, he murmured. What your place has become, what I'm trying to become. The photograph offered no response, of course, but William felt a sense of peace nonetheless. Though Holt Fletcher was gone, his presence lingered in every corner of the ranch, in the land itself, and in the values he had imparted to his son. Values William was only now beginning to fully appreciate. He replaced the photograph carefully and stepped outside, where the evening star had appeared in the deepening twilight. Abel stood at the edge of the porch, pipe smoke wreathing his white head as he gazed at the gathering darkness. Beautiful evening, the old preacher commented as William joined him. William nodded agreement. Makes you understand why my father never wanted to leave this place. Abel studied him thoughtfully. And you? Have you made your peace with staying? It was a question William had asked himself many times over the past year. After a lifetime of restlessness, of searching for something he couldn't name, the idea of settling in one place had initially felt like a constraint, a sacrifice made out of duty rather than choice. I have, he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. This land, it grows on you, gets into your blood. Like your father before you, Abel observed, though I suspect you will make your own way on it. Already have, with some of those new ideas of yours. William smiled slightly. His father had been a traditionalist, sticking to methods that had served ranchers for generations. William, drawing on experiences gathered during his years away, had begun implementing changes, crossbreeding the cattle for hardier stock, diversifying with a small horse breeding operation, even experimenting with new crops in the fertile bottomland along the creek. The land abides, he said, echoing his father's words. But that doesn't mean we can't help it along a bit. They stood in companionable silence for a time, watching as stars emerged one by one in the vast Wyoming sky. Eventually, Abel knocked the ash from his pipe, a signal that he was preparing to depart for his own small cabin a few miles distant. Before I go, the old man said, his tone turning serious, there's something I've been meaning to give you. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small object, which he pressed into William's palm. William looked down, surprised to find a military medal, a small silver disc bearing the profile of President Grant, suspended from a faded ribbon. The Shoshone Chief's Peace Medal, he said, recognition dawning. But how? Your father gave it to me for safekeeping before he died, Abel explained. Asked me to hold it until I judged you were ready. William's fingers closed around the medal, feeling the weight of its significance. Ready for what? Abel's weathered face was solemn in the gathering darkness. To decide what to do with it. The medal was evidence against Cordell, yes, but it's also a symbol of broken promises, of justice denied. Its true owner is gone, but his people remain. Understanding dawned in William's eyes. You think I should return it to the Shoshone. I think the decision is yours, Abel corrected gently, as your father intended it to be. A test of sorts. William stared at the medal, turning it over in his palm. The silver gleamed dully in the fading light, a tangible link to his darkest days with Cordell's gang, to the massacre he had witnessed but failed to prevent. The memory of those events still haunted him, still woke him from sleep on occasional nights when the past refused to stay buried. The reservation is 3 days' ride from here, he said thoughtfully, past Fort Laramie. Abel nodded, understanding the connection William had made. Convenient, if you were of a mind to witness Cordell's execution and then continue on. William was silent for a long moment, weighing possibilities, measuring choices against the man he had been and the man he was trying to become. Finally, he slipped the medal into his pocket. Decision made. I'll leave after the first snow, he said. The cattle are settled for winter, and Emma can manage things here for a few weeks. Abel smiled, approval evident in his eyes. Your father would be proud, William, not just of the decision, but of the thought behind it. I hope so, William replied softly. I'm trying to honor what he taught me, even if I didn't always listen at the time. That's the way of sons and fathers, Abel said with a philosophical shrug. The lessons take root even when we think they fall on barren ground. He clapped William on the shoulder. I'd best get home before full dark. Emma's welcome to stay in my cabin tonight if she's worried about propriety. William felt a flush rise to his cheeks. It's not like that, Abel. Emma's just a friend who helps around the place. The old preacher's eyes twinkled with knowing amusement. If you say so, son, but I've seen the way she looks at you when you're not watching, and the way you look at her, for that matter. Before William could formulate a response, Abel had descended the porch steps and was making his way to his horse. Good night, William, he called over his shoulder. Give my regards to Emma. As Abel rode away into the gathering darkness, William remained on the porch, contemplating the old man's parting words. Emma was indeed a comfort, her presence bringing warmth back to a home that had grown cold with grief. But William had not allowed himself to consider the possibility of more. His past still felt too raw, too filled with regret and violence to offer anyone, especially someone as fundamentally good as Emma Wilson. The cabin door opened behind him, spilling warm lamplight onto the porch. Abel's gone? Emma asked, stepping outside to stand beside him. William nodded. Said to give you his regards. Emma made a small sound of amusement. That old matchmaker. What else did he say? Nothing worth repeating, William replied, though he couldn't quite meet her eyes. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as the last light faded from the western horizon, leaving only stars in its wake. The night air carried the scent of pine and sage, of earth preparing for winter's sleep. Will you go? Emma finally asked, her voice gentle. To see Cordell hang? William considered the question carefully, feeling the weight of the peace medal in his pocket. Yes, he said at last. Not for vengeance, though, for closure, for my father. And then I'll take the medal to the Shoshone reservation. Return it to the chief's family if I can find them. Emma nodded, accepting his decision without judgment. When? After the first snow. The ranch can spare me for a few weeks by then. He turned to her, suddenly uncertain. Unless you think. I can manage things here, she assured him, understanding his concern. I grew up on a ranch, remember? Know more about cattle than you might think. William smiled, grateful for her competence and her unwavering support over these past months. I don't doubt it. Another comfortable silence fell between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Emma spoke again, her voice holding a note of hesitation unusual for her typically forthright manner. There's something I've been meaning to ask you, William. She turned to face him fully, the lamplight from the open door illuminating her features. When you come back from this journey, what then? He understood the deeper question beneath her words. Then I continue building what my father started, he said slowly. Make this place something that would make him proud, something that might someday pass to... He trailed off, implications hanging in the air between them. Emma held his gaze steadily. Children need a mother as well as a father, she said simply. William felt a tightening in his chest, not pain, but a kind of opening, as if some final door within him had been unlocked. Are you offering for the position, Emma Wilson? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. A smile touched her lips, warm and genuine. I might be, if the right man were to ask properly. In that moment, standing on the porch of his father's cabin beneath a sky ablaze with stars, William Fletcher felt the last shadows of his past begin to recede. The road ahead was not without its challenges. Cordell's execution to witness, a peace medal to return, a ranch to build, a life to create. But for the first time in years, that road seemed lit with promise rather than darkened by regret. I'll bear that in mind, he said softly, reaching out to take Emma's hand in his. Above them, the stars of Wyoming shone with unwavering brightness, the same stars that had witnessed his father's life and death, that had guided William home, that would watch over whatever future he managed to build in this place of beginnings and endings, and most importantly, of forgiveness. For it was forgiveness of his father, of himself, of the past with all its mistakes, that had finally set William Fletcher free. Free to honor his father's legacy while forging his own path. Free to embrace the land that had always been his birthright. Free at last to become the man Holt Fletcher had always believed he could be. And somewhere beyond the veil that separates this world from the next, Holt and Eleanor Fletcher watched over their son, their love as constant and eternal as the stars themselves.